I'm fine, sir. Annie Brooks hesitated before answering the man who had stopped beside her. Jonathan came closer while leaving enough space between them so she would not feel trapped. You don't look like someone who's fine, he said. I've seen you standing outside this cafe for quite a while. Your legs are shaking. Are you hiding? Annie immediately stepped back. One hand disappeared behind her body. The other tightened around the strap of the worn canvas backpack hanging from her shoulder. She had not expected anyone to notice her. Most people had passed without looking twice. That was what she wanted. She had chosen a crowded sidewalk because crowds made a person harder to follow, but they also made it easier to disappear. I'm just a little tired. Jonathan studied her face. You look like you're about to faint. I already told you I'm fine. Her voice tightened. Thank you for your concern, sir, but I have to go. She turned toward the station entrance. But after one step, she stopped as the sidewalk seemed to tilt beneath her. Jonathan raised a hand, ready to steady her, but did not touch her. Careful. I don't need help. Maybe not, he said, but you need to sit down. Before Annie could answer, a black Chevrolet Suburban turned toward the curb. The color drained from her face. Her hidden hand closed around a small silver USB drive until its metal edge dug into her palm. Her fingers began to tremble, and the shaking slowly moved into her wrist. Jonathan saw it. You're afraid of that vehicle, he said. Who's inside? Annie's breathing changed at once. Shorter, faster. Jonathan reacted almost without thinking. He stepped sideways, placing his body partly between Annie and the Suburban's dark windows. I don't know them, Annie said. Jonathan glanced at her. That wasn't what I asked. I have to go. Her eyes remained fixed on the vehicle. Please, sir. Pretend you never saw me. The Suburban slowed as it approached. Jonathan looked toward the cafe entrance. Come inside. Annie shook her head. There are people in there, he said. There are cameras too. Whoever is in that vehicle will be less likely to approach you in a crowded business. No. Why not? Would a place like that even let someone like me walk in? Annie asked, her voice catching. Or will people stare and whisper? Maybe there'll be trouble just because someone like me is sitting there. Jonathan looked through the window, then back at her. It's a coffee shop, not a private club, and I can promise you no one in there is going to hurt you. Annie did not answer. She watched the black vehicle. For a moment, it appeared the people inside were preparing to leave. Only then did she speak. You might know them. The people in the Suburban? The people they work for. Jonathan glanced toward the vehicle. It had stopped 2 parking spaces from the cafe entrance, its engine still running. I don't know them, he said. But standing on the sidewalk won't help you find out. Annie looked through the cafe window. A waitress stood behind the counter pouring coffee. 2 older men occupied a booth near the entrance. A mother was cutting pancakes for her young son. Ordinary people, witnesses. Annie's stomach suddenly cramped so sharply that she pressed her forearm against it. Jonathan noticed immediately. When did you last eat? That doesn't matter. It does if you collapse before reaching wherever you're trying to go. I ate yesterday. What time? Annie did not answer. Jonathan opened the cafe door and waited. 5 minutes. Water. Something to eat. And a place where that vehicle can't pull up beside you. After that, you can go wherever you want. I don't have any money. I didn't ask whether you did. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion. People don't buy things for strangers without wanting something in return. My mother used to say the same thing. Jonathan kept the door open. She also used to tell me she had already eaten whenever there wasn't enough food for both of us. For the first time, Annie looked at him without immediately turning away. The Suburban's engine continued idling outside. She stepped into the cafe. I'll only sit for a minute, she said. I won't bother you. I'll leave right away. I'm not forcing you to do anything. Jonathan followed her inside and chose a table near the back. From there, Annie could see the entrance without sitting directly in front of the window. He ordered a turkey sandwich, a bowl of chicken noodle soup, and a bottle of water. I didn't say I wanted all that. You didn't say you wanted anything. I can't stay long. Then eat quickly. When the food arrived, Annie stared at it for several seconds. Steam rose from the soup. The sandwich was thick with turkey, lettuce, and tomato. She picked up one half but did not take a bite. Jonathan sat across from her. Who are you supposed to meet? No one. You've checked that dead phone at least 6 times. Annie's fingers tightened around the bread. A reporter, she said at last. Jonathan's expression changed. Which reporter? I shouldn't have told you. You say you're fine, but your hands shake when you see that vehicle, and you're holding that USB as though your life depends on it. His voice remained calm. Keeping everything from the only person standing between you and them may not be the safest choice right now. Annie stared at him. I'm afraid you won't believe me. If you don't tell me, I won't have the chance to. Annie lowered the sandwich. They know I took it. The USB you're holding? His eyes moved toward her hidden hand. She nodded and slowly brought it from behind her back. A small silver USB drive rested in her palm. A thin red mark crossed her skin where she had gripped it too tightly. It contains records from Harrow House, she said. Money that was supposed to pay for scholarships, medical care, and apartments for young people leaving the center. There are names of people who haven't lived there for years. And there are letters. What letters? Annie's voice nearly broke. Families wrote because they wanted to adopt me. Miss Harrow hid every one of them. She told me no one had ever wanted me. Jonathan looked at the USB and then at the frightened young woman sitting across from him. Who is Miss Harrow? Before Annie could answer, the cafe door opened. A man in a navy sport coat stepped inside. An identification badge was clipped inside his jacket. His gaze swept across the room until it settled on Annie. Annie, he called. Finally, we found you. Her entire body went rigid. Mr. Price, Annie said quietly. Walter Price gave her a calm smile. Miss Harrow has been worried about you. You left without telling anyone where you were going. I'm old enough to make my own decisions. Yes, Annie, we know. His tone was patient, almost parental, and Jonathan immediately noticed Annie tighten her grip around the silver USB. I think you gentlemen have come to the wrong place, Jonathan said calmly, with the quiet authority of a man used to being in control. Walter turned to him. And you are? Jonathan Reed. Recognition crossed Walter's face. Mr. Reed, of course, your foundation has supported Harrow House for years. Jonathan's expression hardened slightly. Walter continued, Annie is one of our residents. She left during a difficult transition and took confidential material from the center. We only want to bring her back safely. She doesn't want to go with you, Jonathan said. She's upset. That doesn't change her answer. Walter stepped closer. The files she took contain sensitive information. If she gives them to the wrong people, she could hurt the very residents Harrow House is trying to protect. Annie lowered her eyes. Jonathan saw what Walter was doing. He was not threatening her. He was making her feel responsible. Jonathan turned to Annie. Did you copy anyone's private medical records? No, only financial records, donor lists, transfers, and letters. Walter's expression tightened. Then let's be clear, Jonathan said. Whatever dispute you have over those files can be handled legally. It does not give you the right to take her anywhere against her will. Walter's smile disappeared. Mr. Reed, your name is connected to Harrow House. I would think you'd want to protect the institution. I want to protect the people my money was supposed to help. Annie looked at him. Walter turned back to her. Annie, Miss Harrow gave you a home. She took care of you when you were sick. She arranged your education. She was there when no one else was. The words struck harder than Annie expected. She remembered Evelyn beside her bed when she had the flu. Birthday cakes. School uniforms. Christmas gifts placed at the foot of her bed. For years, those memories had silenced every doubt. Walter saw the hesitation. Come back with me, he said. Return what you took, and we can settle this quietly. Annie stared at the table. What happens if I go back? We talk. Will Miss Harrow give me my letters? Walter paused. What letters? The letters from families who wanted to adopt me. His eyes flicked toward the USB. I don't know anything about that. Annie looked up. You knew I took something. You knew exactly where to find me. My phone is dead. How? Walter said nothing. Jonathan leaned forward. Are you tracking her? We have procedures for residents who leave unexpectedly. She isn't a missing child, Jonathan said. Walter's voice cooled. Harrow House raised her. We still have responsibilities. You had responsibilities, Annie said. Her voice trembled. But she did not look away. That doesn't mean you own me. If you believe Annie has the right to control her own life, please give this video a like to show your support for her courage. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. You may be surprised to discover that someone near you is watching Annie's story too. Several customers had begun watching. Walter glanced around the cafe. This doesn't need to become a scene. Then leave, Jonathan said. Walter looked at Annie one last time. Miss Harrow will be very disappointed. Annie flinched. Jonathan saw it. She can speak to Annie through an attorney. Walter turned sharply toward him. You're involving lawyers before you even know what she's done? I only know she said no, and you're still trying to take her with you. That ended the argument. Walter stood there for a few seconds, then removed a business card and placed it on the table. When you're ready to fix this, he told Annie, call me. Jonathan took out his phone. Hold your badge where I can see it. Walter frowned. You identified yourself as Harrow House Security. I want a record. After a brief hesitation, Walter opened his jacket enough for Jonathan to photograph the badge. Jonathan also took a picture of the Suburban's license plate through the window. Walter's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what you're stepping into. Maybe not, Jonathan said. But if Harrow House has nothing to hide, those records should prove it. Walter turned and left. The black Suburban remained outside for several seconds before finally pulling away. Annie stared at Walter's business card. You shouldn't have done that. Done what? Let them know you're helping me. Jonathan sat back down. I haven't decided what the files prove yet. Her expression hardened. So you don't believe me. I believe you're afraid. I believe someone followed you here. And I believe what's on that USB needs to be examined. He nodded toward it. Believing you and proving what happened are two different things. You deserve both. Annie said nothing. Jonathan pointed toward her dead phone. You said you were trying to meet a reporter. Sarah Klein, Atlanta Sentinel. She answered my email last night. But the phone died before I got the meeting location. May I? After a moment, Annie handed him the phone. Jonathan connected it to a portable charger from his briefcase. Where are you staying tonight? He asked. I'll figure something out. That means nowhere. I've managed before. And now someone is tracking you. Annie looked at him carefully. What are you offering? A secure apartment owned by my foundation. One night, my attorney can meet us there, and we can contact Sarah Klein. What do you want? To find out whether my foundation spent millions of dollars on programs that never existed. Annie picked up the USB. I keep this. Fina. Nobody contacts Miss Harrow. Not without telling you first. The phone screen suddenly lit up. 12 missed calls. Every one of them from Harrow House. Then a new message appeared from an unknown number. Annie opened it. Return what you took, or everyone will learn what kind of girl you really are. Her face went pale. Jonathan read the message. Outside, the black Suburban was gone, but Annie knew they had not stopped looking for her. Jonathan did not ask Annie to delete the message. He took a screenshot, wrote down the time, and forwarded a copy to his attorney before returning the phone. Keep it, he said. Threats have a way of disappearing once the sender realizes they matter. Annie looked toward the window again. They'll know where we go. Not if we leave through the hotel garage. The hotel? The building next door connects to it. She studied him as though testing whether the suggestion was a trap. Jonathan paid the bill, asked the waitress for a paper bag, and placed the rest of Annie's sandwich and the unopened crackers from the soup tray inside it. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than an explanation would have. They crossed through the cafe's rear hallway, entered the adjoining hotel lobby, and took an elevator down to the parking garage. Jonathan's sedan was parked near a security camera. Before unlocking it, he checked beneath the chassis and photographed the surrounding vehicles. Annie noticed. Do you always do that? No. That doesn't make me feel better. It wasn't meant to. During the drive, she kept the USB inside her closed fist. Downtown Atlanta gave way to quieter streets lined with brick offices, churches, and older apartment buildings. Jonathan did not tell her to relax. People who said that usually meant they wanted fear to become less inconvenient. The apartment belonged to the Reed Foundation and was normally used for visiting teachers, medical volunteers, or families receiving emergency assistance. It occupied the 4th floor of a building with a staffed front desk and cameras covering both entrances. Annie stopped in the doorway. The apartment had a small kitchen, a living room, and one bedroom. Nothing inside looked expensive enough to impress anyone. A folded blanket rested on the sofa. A bowl of apples sat on the counter. You said one night, she reminded him. One night to begin with. And no one from Harrow House knows about this place. Not unless my foundation has a security problem larger than the one we're about to discuss. Jonathan called his attorney, David Rosen, and an outside forensic accountant named Claire Donnelly. He instructed both of them to come without assistance and to use the garage entrance. Annie remained near the door. "You can lock it," Jonathan said. She turned the dead bolt, then tested it twice. When David and Claire arrived 40 minutes later, Annie had eaten the rest of the sandwich but saved the crackers in her backpack. Claire, a woman in her early 40s with reading glasses and a habit of speaking only after she had checked her notes, placed a clean laptop and 2 sealed storage drives on the dining table. David introduced himself, then started explaining confidentiality, evidence handling, and possible legal exposure. Annie stood behind a chair while the 3 adults spoke around her. Jonathan noticed. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table. "Annie should sit here." David paused. "Of course. She should also hear everything." Annie sat slowly, keeping the USB in her hand. Claire opened a notebook. "Before I touch that device, I need to know how you obtained the files. I found an external hard drive in a storage room at Harrow House. Did you take the drive?" "No. I connected it to a computer in the records office and copied what I could. Did you change any file names?" "No." "Delete anything?" "No." "Open files containing medical information about children?" "I saw folders with medical labels. I didn't copy them." Claire nodded. "Good. Do you remember whether the computer was connected to the internet?" "Yes. That may be how they knew." Annie looked at Jonathan. "I told you they tracked me." "The login could have alerted them," Claire said. "That doesn't explain how they found the cafe." Jonathan placed Annie's phone on the table. "We'll have it checked." Claire photographed the USB from several angles, noted its serial number, then asked Annie to place it inside a clear evidence sleeve. Annie did not release it. "What happens after I give it to you?" "I make an exact copy," Claire said. "The original stays sealed. We work from the duplicate so no one can claim the files were altered after you left. And if your foundation's name is in there?" "I report what the records show," Jonathan added. "She doesn't work for me." Claire looked at him. "And if she did, that answer would be the same." Annie finally placed the USB in the sleeve. Claire connected it through a right-blocking device and began copying the contents. Folders appeared on the screen: resident rosters, scholarship disbursements, medical support grants, transition housing, donor correspondence, vendor payments. Jonathan leaned closer when he saw his foundation's name. Claire opened a spreadsheet listing 3 years of scholarship awards. More than 40 students were shown as recipients. Several entries included college names, tuition amounts, and approval codes. Annie pointed to one row. "Keisha Monroe never went to that college. She works at a nursing home in East Point. Miss Harrow told her the scholarship committee rejected her." Claire marked the entry. Another sheet showed monthly housing assistance for young adults who had left Harrow House. "That's Darnell Price," Annie said. "He moved out almost 4 years ago." "Related to Walter?" David asked. "No." The medical support folder contained reimbursements for counseling, dental care, and outpatient treatment. Annie recognized names of residents who had never received those services. Jonathan's face tightened. "How much did my foundation provide for these programs?" "According to the files here, just over $3 million across 9 years, Claire said. "But this copy is incomplete. I can see references to attachments that aren't present." "The original hard drive had more," Annie said. "I heard someone coming. I copied the folders that looked most important." Claire opened a vendor payment ledger. Several large transfers had gone to Harrow Community Strategies LLC, described as a consulting and resident support provider. David searched the company through the Georgia Corporate Registry. "The registered address is a private residence," he said. "Owner listed as Patricia Harrow." "Miss Harrow's sister," Annie said. No one spoke for a moment. Claire continued through the files until she found a folder marked Donor Relations. Inside were photographs, annual reports, letters of endorsement, and lists of prominent contributors. Jonathan's name appeared near the top. His signature had been reproduced beneath a statement praising Harrow House for its measurable success in preparing every resident for independent adulthood. He stared at it. "I signed that after a site visit." "Did you verify the results?" Annie asked. "My staff reviewed the annual report." "That wasn't what I asked." Jonathan met her eyes. "No," he said, "I didn't." Claire opened another file. It contained scanned correspondence connected to Annie's case number. The first page was a letter from Thomas and Rebecca Whitfield requesting permission to meet her. The second was another request 6 months later. The third asked why no response had been received. Annie's breathing slowed, not from calm but from the effort of holding herself together. There were more, she said. Years of them. David leaned toward the screen. These copies help, but we need originals or independent confirmation from the families. So this proves nothing? It proves where to look, Claire said. That matters. Jonathan stood beside the window. What do we have right now? Claire counted carefully. Possible inflated enrollment. False scholarship reporting. Questionable medical reimbursements. Money routed through a related company. Concealed correspondence. And misuse of donor endorsements. Enough to investigate, not enough yet to make every accusation public. Annie looked at the sealed USB. So after all that, Miss Harrow can still say I'm lying. For now, David said. She can say anything. Jonathan turned from the window. Then we stop arguing with what she says and start proving what she did. At that moment, Annie's phone vibrated on the table. A photograph appeared from the same unknown number. It showed the entrance of the apartment building. The picture had been taken less than 5 minutes earlier. Jonathan did not ask Annie to delete the message. He took a screenshot, wrote down the time, and forwarded a copy to his attorney before returning the phone. Keep it, he said. Threats have a way of disappearing once the sender realizes they matter. Annie looked toward the window again. They'll know where we go, not if we leave through the hotel garage. The hotel? The building next door connects to it. She studied him as though testing whether the suggestion was a trap. Jonathan paid the bill, asked the waitress for a paper bag, and placed the rest of Annie's sandwich and the unopened crackers from the soup tray inside it. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. That answer seemed to unsettle her more than an explanation would have. They crossed through the cafe's rear hallway, entered the adjoining hotel lobby, and took an elevator down to the parking garage. Jonathan's sedan was parked near a security camera. Before unlocking it, he checked beneath the chassis and photographed the surrounding vehicles. Annie noticed. Do you always do that? No. That doesn't make me feel better. It wasn't meant to. During the drive, she kept the USB inside her closed fist. Downtown Atlanta gave way to quieter streets lined with brick offices, churches, and older apartment buildings. Jonathan did not tell her to relax. People who said that usually meant they wanted fear to become less inconvenient. The apartment belonged to the Reed Foundation and was normally used for visiting teachers, medical volunteers, or families receiving emergency assistance. It occupied the 4th floor of a building with a staffed front desk and cameras covering both entrances. Annie stopped in the doorway. The apartment had a small kitchen, a living room, and 1 bedroom. Nothing inside looked expensive enough to impress anyone. A folded blanket rested on the sofa. A bowl of apples sat on the counter. You said one night, she reminded him. One night to begin with. And no one from Harrow House knows about this place. Not unless my foundation has a security problem larger than the one we're about to discuss. Jonathan called his attorney, David Rosen, and an outside forensic accountant named Claire Donnelly. He instructed both of them to come without assistance and to use the garage entrance. Annie remained near the door. You can lock it, Jonathan said. She turned the deadbolt, then tested it twice. When David and Claire arrived 40 minutes later, Annie had eaten the rest of the sandwich but saved the crackers in her backpack. Claire, a woman in her early 40s with reading glasses and a habit of speaking only after she had checked her notes, placed a clean laptop and 2 sealed storage drives on the dining table. David introduced himself, then started explaining confidentiality, evidence handling, and possible legal exposure. Annie stood behind a chair while the 3 adults spoke around her. Jonathan noticed. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table. Annie should sit here. David paused. Of course. She should also hear everything. Annie sat slowly, keeping the USB in her hand. Claire opened a notebook. Before I touch that device, I need to know how you obtained the files. I found an external hard drive in a storage room at Harrow House. Did you take the drive? No. I connected it to a computer in the records office and copied what I could. Did you change any file names? No. Delete anything? No. Open files containing medical information about children? I saw folders with medical labels. I didn't copy them. Claire nodded. Good. Do you remember whether the computer was connected to the internet? Yes. That may be how they knew. Annie looked at Jonathan. I told you they tracked me. The login could have alerted them, Claire said. That doesn't explain how they found the cafe. Jonathan placed Annie's phone on the table. We'll have it checked. Claire photographed the USB from several angles, noted its serial number, then asked Annie to place it inside a clear evidence sleeve. Annie did not release it. What happens after I give it to you? I make an exact copy, Claire said. The original stays sealed. We work from the duplicate so no one can claim the files were altered after you left. And if your foundation's name is in there, I report what the records show. Jonathan added, she doesn't work for me. Claire looked at him, and if she did, that answer would be the same. Annie finally placed the USB in the sleeve. Claire connected it through a right-blocking device and began copying the contents. Folders appeared on the screen. Resident rosters, scholarship disbursements, medical support grants, transition housing, donor correspondence, vendor payments. Jonathan leaned closer when he saw his foundation's name. Claire opened a spreadsheet listing 3 years of scholarship awards. More than 40 students were shown as recipients. Several entries included college names, tuition amounts, and approval codes. Annie pointed to one row. Keisha Monroe never went to that college. She works at a nursing home in East Point. Miss Harrow told her the scholarship committee rejected her. Claire marked the entry. Another sheet showed monthly housing assistance for young adults who had left Harrow House. That's Darnell Price, Annie said. He moved out almost 4 years ago. Related to Walter? David asked. No. The medical support folder contained reimbursements for counseling, dental care, and outpatient treatment. Annie recognized names of residents who had never received those services. Jonathan's face tightened. How much did my foundation provide for these programs? According to the files here, just over $3 million across 9 years, Claire said. But this copy is incomplete. I can see references to attachments that aren't present. The original hard drive had more, Annie said. I heard someone coming. I copied the folders that looked most important. Claire opened a vendor payment ledger. Several large transfers had gone to Harrow Community Strategies, LLC, described as a consulting and resident support provider. David searched the company through the Georgia Corporate Registry. The registered address is a private residence, he said. Owner listed as Patricia Harrow. Miss Harrow's sister, Annie said. No one spoke for a moment. Claire continued through the files until she found a folder marked Donor Relations. Inside were photographs, annual reports, letters of endorsement, and lists of prominent contributors. Jonathan's name appeared near the top. His signature had been reproduced beneath a statement praising Harrow House for its measurable success in preparing every resident for independent adulthood. He stared at it. I signed that after a site visit. Did you verify the results? Annie asked. My staff reviewed the annual report. That wasn't what I asked. Jonathan met her eyes. No, he said. I didn't. Claire opened another file. It contained scanned correspondence connected to Annie's case number. The first page was a letter from Thomas and Rebecca Whitfield, requesting permission to meet her. The second was another request, 6 months later. The third asked why no response had been received. Annie's breathing slowed, not from calm but from the effort of holding herself together. There were more, she said, years of them. David leaned toward the screen. These copies help, but we need originals or independent confirmation from the families. So this proves nothing? It proves where to look, Claire said. That matters. Jonathan stood beside the window. What do we have right now? Claire counted carefully. Possible inflated enrollment, false scholarship reporting, questionable medical reimbursements, money routed through a related company, concealed correspondence, and misuse of donor endorsements. Enough to investigate, not enough yet to make every accusation public. Annie looked at the sealed USB. So after all that, Miss Harrow can still say I'm lying. For now, David said. She can say anything. Jonathan turned from the window. Then we stop arguing with what she says and start proving what she did. At that moment, Annie's phone vibrated on the table. A photograph appeared from the same unknown number. It showed the entrance of the apartment building. The picture had been taken less than 5 minutes earlier. Jonathan ended the call and looked at Annie. The board wants me downtown. They want me gone. They want the problem gone. Right now, they've decided you are the easiest part to move. Annie pushed her chair back. Then I'll leave before they make you choose. Jonathan's voice remained calm. Sit down. You said you wouldn't force me to do anything. I'm not forcing you. I'm asking you not to make their decision for them. She stayed on her feet. David closed his laptop. Jonathan, the board can restrict use of foundation property. They may also suspend your authority to commit emergency funds without a vote. They can try. This is not Reed Technologies. The foundation has independent directors. I wrote the bylaws, and you gave them real power because you said no charitable organization should depend on one wealthy man's judgment. Jonathan gave him a tired look. I remember. Annie picked up her backpack. I can stay at the station. No, Jonathan said. I've slept in worse places. That does not make a train station acceptable. It makes it possible. Jonathan crossed the room and stopped several feet from her. Annie, if you walk outside now, Walter will know before you reach the corner. Your phone may be compromised. The building has been photographed, and Harrow House has already described you publicly as unstable. Leaving alone is not independence. It is exactly the outcome they are trying to create. Her grip tightened on the backpack strap. I'm not going to cost you your foundation. You are not costing me anything. The people who approved false reports may cost us something. I may have cost us something by failing to look closely enough. Those are not your debts. Annie looked away. Claire gathered the copied drives. I can take the evidence to my office. It has better physical security than this apartment. David nodded. I'll arrange a clean phone and contact Sarah's counsel. Annie should not remain at an address they already know. Jonathan considered the options. There's a guest residence at the Foundation's Education Center in Buckhead. It is not listed publicly. David shook his head. The board will trace it. Let them. That turns a legal dispute into a governance fight. It already is one. Jonathan's assistant called again to say the emergency meeting had been moved forward. Directors were already gathering through secure video, and 2 had come to the Foundation's headquarters in person. Jonathan reached for his jacket. Annie said, You're leaving me here? For 40 minutes, with David, Claire, building security, and 2 guards downstairs. I don't know any of them. That's fair. He handed her a second business card with his private number written on the back. Call me if anyone enters without your permission. Anyone. What if the board tells you not to come back? Jonathan opened the door. Then they'll have to explain why they believe protecting an institution's reputation matters more than protecting the person who exposed its fraud. The Foundation occupied 3 floors of a glass building in Midtown. By the time Jonathan entered the conference room, 12 directors appeared on wall screens, and 4 sat around the table. Most had worked with him for years. Several had attended Harrow House galas beside him. Margaret Ellis, a retired federal judge and chair of the board, began without ceremony. Jonathan, we need clarity. Is Annie Brooks being housed with Foundation resources? Yes. Did the board authorize it? No. Did you confirm her allegations before placing the Foundation in a conflict with one of its grantees? We now have independent confirmation that 3 colleges did not receive scholarship funds reported in their names. A director from Boston leaned toward his camera. That proves accounting irregularities, not an organized fraud scheme. It proves enough to investigate. And until then, another asked. We allow an unidentified former resident to hold stolen records in one of our apartments? Her identity is verified. Her stability is not. Jonathan stared at the screen. What evidence do you have that she is unstable? Harrow House issued a statement. Harrow House is the institution accused of misconduct. Margaret folded her hands. Lower the temperature. No one is suggesting we abandon her. We are suggesting she be transferred to a neutral youth services provider, while counsel reviews the matter. Which provider? No one answered immediately. Jonathan understood before they said it. Margaret finally replied. The Regional Transition Network has an emergency placement agreement, funded through Harrow House. Partly. Then it is not neutral. A board member named Thomas Bell removed his glasses. Jonathan, your personal history is affecting your judgment. You see a hungry young woman who reminds you of your mother, and now you're prepared to endanger a foundation serving thousands. My judgment was more endangered when I signed reports I had not verified. Silence followed. Jonathan placed Claire's preliminary findings on the screen. The directors read the summarized transfers, duplicated residence, shell company address, and missing scholarship confirmations. "This is not a misunderstanding," he said. "And Annie is not the danger in this room." Margaret read for another minute. "What are you proposing? Freeze all unrestricted transfers to Harrow House. Continue essential food, transportation, medical, and education funding through an independent administrator. Begin a forensic audit. Preserve every record. Protect Annie as a cooperating witness." Thomas exhaled. "That will trigger press attention. The press is already involved. It could destroy Harrow House. If one audit can destroy it, we did not fund a home. We funded a story." Several directors shifted in their seats. Margaret asked, "And if children lose services during the investigation?" "They won't. I will personally guarantee emergency continuity until an independent provider is in place. That creates another conflict." "Then record the conflict." Thomas looked at him. "You are willing to risk your name over the word of an 18-year-old you met this morning?" Jonathan's expression hardened. "For 9 years, my name appeared on Harrow House walls, brochures, and fundraising letters. No one here considered that risky because the rooms were clean and the annual reports used the right language. Now a young black woman brings us records showing those reports may be false, and suddenly her word is the threat. That is not what anyone said. It is what our actions say." Margaret called for a vote. The board approved a temporary funding freeze by the narrowest possible margin. Essential services would continue through a separate account, and an external audit would begin within 24 hours. No decision was made about Annie's housing. Jonathan returned to the apartment after dark. Annie was sitting at the kitchen table with a legal pad. She had begun writing names, dates, and memories for Sarah. The bowl of soup was empty. The crackers remained in her backpack. "What happened?" she asked. "They voted to freeze the money." Her face fell. "What about the people living there? Meals, school transportation, medical care, and housing continue. The money will no longer pass through Evelyn's office." "You did that?" "The board did. Because you made them. Because the evidence gave them fewer places to hide." Annie looked at her notes. "And this apartment? You can stay tonight. Tomorrow we move you somewhere they haven't found." A knock sounded at the door. Everyone went still. David checked the security monitor. No one stood in the hall. Then came another knock, lower this time, from the service entrance beside the kitchen. Jonathan motioned for Annie to step back. Building security was called, and 2 guards searched the corridor. They found no person, only Annie's old canvas backpack, the one she had left beside her chair minutes earlier, now sitting outside the service door. Its zipper was open. The crackers were gone. In their place lay a photograph of Annie at 9 years old, standing beside Evelyn Harrow at a birthday table. Across the white border, someone had written 5 words in black ink. "We know what you owe us." Jonathan read the words twice before handing the photograph to David. "We know what you owe us." Annie stood near the kitchen wall, staring at the picture of herself at 9 years old. In it, she wore a paper birthday crown and held a plastic knife above a sheet cake. Evelyn stood behind her with both hands on Annie's shoulders, smiling toward the camera. "I remember that day," Annie said. She told the donors it was the first birthday anyone had ever celebrated for me. "Was it?" Claire asked. Annie shook her head. "My mother used to bake chocolate cupcakes. I told Miss Harrow that once. She said grief could make children invent things." David placed the photograph inside a clear sleeve. "Who had access to the backpack?" "It was beside my chair," Annie said. "No one." Jonathan looked toward the service door. "Someone entered the apartment. The lock shows no damage," one of the guards said. "Then someone had a key." The guard's face tightened. "Only building management and foundation operations should have access." "Should," Jonathan repeated. Within an hour, the apartment was treated as compromised. Claire packed the evidence copies. David arranged for a private security team unconnected to the foundation's usual contractors. Annie changed into clothes Rebecca Whitfield had once bought for donation and left in the apartment closet, though Annie did not yet know Rebecca's name. They moved before midnight. The new location was a small guest house behind a church-owned community center in southwest Atlanta. It had no foundation sign, no public listing, and no electronic lock connected to the same system. Reverend Samuel Carter, a retired pastor in his late 60s, met them at the side gate wearing slacks, a cardigan, and house shoes. Jonathan introduced Annie without explaining more than necessary. Reverend Carter looked at her backpack and tired face. Kitchen's open. Guest room is clean. Nobody asks questions before breakfast unless the house is on fire. Annie glanced at Jonathan. He knows only that you need privacy, Jonathan said. That's enough for tonight, the Reverend added. Inside, the guest house smelled of coffee, furniture polish, and cornbread cooling beneath a dish towel. Family photographs covered one wall. None had donor names engraved beneath them. Reverend Carter pointed toward the kitchen. There's chicken in the refrigerator, greens on the stove, and peach cobbler if the deacons didn't finish it. I'm not hungry, Annie said automatically. Jonathan looked at her. She caught herself and lowered her eyes. Maybe a little. That's usually how hunger starts, the Reverend said. A little. Annie ate at the kitchen table while David and Claire worked in the next room. Jonathan took a call from the building manager and learned that an operations employee had used a master access code shortly before the photograph appeared. The employee claimed the code had been copied. Can Harrow House access foundation systems? David asked after the call. Not directly, Jonathan said, but we use the same property management vendor for several partner apartments. Claire looked up from her laptop. Then whoever found Annie may be using donor and service provider relationships, not just following her. Annie set down her fork. Miss Harrow always said good partnerships kept the doors open. Jonathan heard the bitterness in the words. The following morning, Sarah Klein arrived carrying a recorder, a yellow legal pad, and 2 cups of coffee. She had agreed to meet only after David sent the preliminary evidence summary, and Claire confirmed the original USB was preserved. Sarah sat across from Annie at the church kitchen table. I'm going to ask questions that may sound cold, she said. That doesn't mean I think you're lying. Annie nodded. Tell me the first financial record that made you suspicious. A scholarship list. Keisha Monroe's name was on it. How did you know she hadn't received the money? She cried in the laundry room after Miss Harrow told her the application was denied. Did you see the denial letter? No. Then we verify it through Keisha and the college. For nearly 2 hours, Sarah built a timeline. She asked when Annie started working in the records room, which passwords she used, where Marcus Hale kept backups, and how resident names appeared in reports after they left. Annie answered carefully. When she did not know something, Sarah made her say so. Guessing weakens what you know, Sarah explained. By noon, they had a list of former residents to contact. The first was Darnell Price, no relation to Walter. He worked as a warehouse supervisor near College Park and agreed to meet during his lunch break. They found him in a Waffle House booth wearing steel-toed boots and a reflective vest. He was 26, broad-shouldered, and cautious when Annie showed him the copied housing records. That's my name, he said. But I left Harrow House 4 years ago. The reports say you received monthly transition support until last spring, Sarah said. Darnell gave a short laugh. I slept on my cousin's couch for 6 months. Asked Harrow House twice about the housing grant. They said the fund was empty. Did you sign these forms? Sarah turned the pages around. Darnell's expression changed. That looks like my signature, but I never signed this. Would you make a statement? He looked toward the parking lot. I've got a job, a daughter. I don't need Walter showing up here. Annie leaned forward. He may come anyway. He already found me. Darnell studied her. You're the one from Evelyn's video. She didn't use my name. She didn't have to. He looked again at the documents. I'll talk, but not here, and not on camera. Sarah agreed. Their second meeting took place that afternoon in the fellowship hall of New Hope Baptist Church. Keisha Monroe arrived in Navy scrubs after a nursing home shift. She read the scholarship ledger twice, then sat down slowly. It says $8,000 went to Georgia State for me. Claire nodded. That is what the report claims. I never enrolled. I couldn't afford the deposit. Annie remembered Keisha packing her textbooks into a box because she thought she had failed. Miss Harrow said the committee chose someone with better grades, Keisha said. I believed her. You had better grades than I did. Annie replied. That's not the point. Keisha looked at Sarah. The point is, I thanked her for trying. Sarah asked permission to contact Georgia State. Keisha agreed. Before they left, Keisha touched Annie's wrist. You didn't make the lie, she said. You just found the receipt. The words stayed with Annie during the drive back. By evening, Sarah had 3 independent confirmations. Darnell had never received housing assistance. Keisha's scholarship had never reached a college. And Luis Mendoza, now serving as an army mechanic, denied attending the counseling sessions billed in his name. Claire compared the dates against Harrow House reports. The same pattern appeared again and again. Former residents remained on paper because each name justified another grant, another success story, another reason for donors to keep giving. Jonathan stood behind Claire as the numbers filled the screen. "How many?" he asked. "So far, 12 former residents with questionable payments," she said. "There may be more." Annie sat at the far end of the table with the photograph from her 9th birthday in front of her. For years, she had thought Harrow House held on to people because Evelyn loved them. Now she saw another possibility. The longer they remained in Evelyn's story, the longer their names could keep earning money. Sarah closed her notebook. "We have a pattern. What we still need is the person who built the accounts." "Marcus Hale," Annie said. Claire searched his old professional license, but the Atlanta address was vacant. His phone was disconnected. His social media accounts had been inactive for more than a year. David found a forwarding record linked to Mobile, Alabama. Jonathan looked at Annie. "Do you know why he left?" "Miss Harrow said he stole from the center." "And do you believe her?" Annie looked at the hidden letters, the false scholarship records, and the photograph carrying a message meant to frighten her back into silence. "No," she said, "not anymore." At that moment, Reverend Carter entered from the hallway holding an envelope. This was pushed under the front door. Jonathan took it before Annie could. There was no stamp and no return address. Inside was a photocopy of Marcus Hale's old employee identification card. Across his face, someone had written, "Ask him what happens to people who forget who saved them." Jonathan turned the photocopy over. The back was blank. Reverend Carter locked the front door and checked the porch camera. It showed only a figure in a hooded sweatshirt moving beyond the reach of the light. The person never faced the lens. "Whoever left this wants us looking at Marcus," David said. "Or wants Marcus frightened before we reach him," Sarah replied. Annie stared at the handwritten warning. "Miss Harrow always did that. She never told you what would happen. She let you imagine something worse." Jonathan slid the paper into an evidence sleeve. "We still contact him, but not from here." Claire continued tracing Marcus's records, while Sarah worked through the adoption letters. Near midnight, she found a current address for Thomas and Rebecca Whitfield in Decatur. Their names appeared on 3 requests to meet Annie, beginning when she was 9. Annie read the address without speaking. Sarah watched her. "We can call them first. What if they don't remember me?" "They kept writing for 4 years. That was a long time ago." Jonathan sat across from her. "You don't have to meet them." Annie looked at the copies. "I spent years being told no one came. I need to know whether they were real." Rebecca Whitfield answered Sarah's call the next morning. At first, she thought it was a scam. Then Sarah read the case number from one of the letters. Rebecca went silent. "Is Annie with you?" she asked. "She is." Another silence followed, this one longer. "May I speak to her?" Annie took the phone with both hands. "Hello?" A woman inhaled sharply on the other end. "Annie Brooks?" "Yes, ma'am. My name is Rebecca Whitfield. My husband and I knew your mother." Anya sat down. "You knew her?" "She volunteered at the library where I worked. She brought you to story hour when you were little. You used to hide behind the picture book shelves and pretend we couldn't see your shoes." Annie remembered red sneakers beneath a table and her mother laughing somewhere above her, but the memory had no faces attached to it. "Why didn't you come?" she asked. Rebecca's voice broke. "We did. They arranged to meet that afternoon." The Whitfields lived in a 1-story brick house on a quiet street lined with oaks. A faded Atlanta Braves flag hung near the garage. Wind chimes moved above the porch. Jonathan offered to go inside with Annie, but she shook her head. "Wait here," he nodded. "I'll be on the porch." Rebecca opened the door before Annie reached it. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut to her jaw and reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. Thomas stood a few feet behind her, broad through the shoulders, his work-worn hands clasped in front of him. Neither tried to hug Annie. Rebecca said, "Thank you for coming." Annie stepped inside. The house smelled of lemon polish and coffee. Family photographs covered a table near the hall. Rebecca had prepared iced tea, chicken salad sandwiches, and a lemon pound cake. The careful hospitality made Annie more nervous. not less. Thomas noticed her looking toward the door. You can leave whenever you want, Miss Annie. Just Annie. All right, just Annie. They sat around the kitchen table. Rebecca placed a thick folder between them. These are copies of every letter we sent. Annie opened it. The first letter asked Harrow House for permission to visit her. The second included references from their church, employer, and neighbors. The third asked why no meeting had been scheduled. Later letters became more urgent, then more restrained. One reply from Evelyn's office stated that Annie had shown severe attachment problems and became distressed when adoption was discussed. Annie looked up. No one ever discussed it with me. We were told you didn't want contact, Rebecca said. I didn't know you existed. Thomas rubbed a hand over his jaw. We should have pushed harder. You believed them. We believed people who said they were protecting you, Rebecca replied. That was our mistake. Annie read a letter dated on her 10th birthday. Rebecca had written about a room they were preparing, a school nearby, and a dog named Barney who slept beside the stairs. You made a room? Rebecca looked toward the hallway. We did. The room was now used for sewing and storage, but Rebecca had kept a cedar chest beneath the window. She opened it and lifted out a blue quilt stitched with white stars. I made this for you, she said. I kept telling myself I would donate it when it became clear you weren't coming. I never did. Annie ran her fingers over the fabric. The room was not proof that life with the Whitfields would have been perfect. It was proof that another life had once been possible, and someone else had chosen to close that door. All those years, Annie said. She looked me in the face and told me nobody came. Rebecca's eyes filled. We came. We were simply kept on the other side of the door. Annie sat on the edge of the bed with the quilt across her knees. For a while, no one spoke. Then Thomas brought in a small photograph. It showed Annie at 4 years old, sitting beside her mother during a library reading program. Her mother was laughing. Annie was holding a book upside down. I thought I forgot her face, Annie whispered. You were very young, Rebecca said. Miss Harrow told me grief makes children invent memories. Rebecca knelt several feet away, leaving Annie space. Your memories may be incomplete. That doesn't make them lies. Annie pressed the photograph against the quilt. When she returned to the porch, Jonathan was sitting on the top step with 2 untouched cups of coffee beside him. He did not ask what she had learned. Annie sat down. I wasn't unwanted, she said. No. She knew people came. Yes. She let me believe there was something wrong with me. Jonathan looked toward the closed front door. Because that belief made you easier to keep. Annie wiped her face with the heel of her hand. I want Sarah to use my name. Jonathan turned to her. You're sure? No. She looked back at the Whitfields' house. But I'm done letting Evelyn tell my story first. Sarah arrived before sunset and photographed the letters with Rebecca's permission. Thomas agreed to provide a statement. Rebecca asked that no part of the story suggest Annie owed them a family relationship now. She's 18, Rebecca said. We already lost the right to choose for her. We won't take it back by pretending kindness gives us a claim. On the drive to the guest house, Annie kept the blue quilt folded across her lap. Claire called before they reached the church. She had found Marcus Hale. He was living outside Mobile, Alabama, under his middle name. There was one complication. Someone from Harrow House had contacted him that morning. Claire's voice came through the car speaker. Someone from Harrow House called Marcus at 8:14 this morning. He didn't answer, but they left a message asking him to contact Evelyn before speaking to anyone else. Jonathan kept his eyes on the highway. Did he agree to meet us? Not yet. He says he wants no part of this. Annie looked down at the blue quilt folded across her lap. He kept the files. That means he wanted someone to find them. Wanting the truth found and wanting to stand beside it are not always the same thing, Jonathan said. They returned to the guest house and called Marcus from David's secure phone. He answered after the 4th attempt. I told your accountant I have nothing to say. His voice was low and tired. Jonathan placed the phone on the table between them. Mr. Hale, this is Jonathan Reed. I know who you are. Then you know my foundation funded Harrow House. That's your problem. It became Annie's problem long before it became mine. Silence followed. Annie leaned toward the phone. Mr. Hale, I found your note. His breathing changed. What note? The one in the storage box. You wrote that the truth was in the numbers. You shouldn't have gone through those files. Neither should Miss Harrow have hidden letters from families who wanted me. Marcus did not answer. Annie continued. She told everyone you stole money. She would. Did you? No. Then why did you leave without saying anything? The question came out harder than Annie intended. Marcus exhaled. Because I signed documents I should not have signed. Because I had a wife who was sick and a mortgage I could barely pay. Because Evelyn knew exactly how much fear to use before a person stopped calling it fear. Annie looked at Jonathan. When can we meet? She asked. You can't. You kept a copy. Another pause. How do you know that? You wouldn't leave a note if you destroyed everything. Marcus lowered his voice. Do not discuss this on the phone. We're using a protected line, David said. There is no protected line once Walter Price decides he wants to hear it. Jonathan glanced toward Claire. She wrote down the statement. Marcus finally agreed to a meeting the next day at a seafood restaurant near Mobile, far from his home and workplace. He refused to give his address. They left Atlanta before sunrise. Jonathan drove because using a hired car would create another record. David sat in front. Annie rode in the back with the quilt beside her and the silver USB inside a zippered pocket of her jacket. The trip south took them through stretches of pine, gas stations, church signs, and long sections of interstate where the radio faded between gospel music and weather reports. Jonathan stopped at a roadside diner after noticing Annie had not eaten. I'm not hungry, she said. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. She sighed. Fine. Maybe biscuits. David hid a smile behind his coffee. They ate eggs, grits, sausage, and biscuits with white gravy. Annie saved one biscuit in a napkin before catching Jonathan's glance. Habit, she said. I know. By early afternoon, they reached the restaurant Marcus had chosen. It sat near a marina, with plastic menus, wooden booths, and shrimp boats visible through the windows. Marcus was already there. He wore a tan work shirt with the name of a marine parts company stitched above the pocket. He looked older than 42. His eyes moved first to Jonathan, then David, and finally, Annie. You shouldn't have come, he said. Annie sat across from him. You said that already. Marcus looked toward the parking lot. Did anyone follow you? No, Jonathan said. You don't know that. David placed a folder on the table. We can provide counsel and negotiate cooperation terms. But first, we need to know what evidence exists. Marcus gave a bitter laugh. There it is. Lawyers always arrive after the damage and ask whether the paperwork is clean. Jonathan did not react. Is it? No. A waitress brought iced tea and baskets of hush puppies. Marcus waited until she left. It started small, he said. A grant came in for housing support, but the roof needed repair. Evelyn moved the money. She said no one would object if the children remained dry. Annie listened without moving. Then a medical grant paid staff salaries. Scholarship funds covered insurance. She called it flexibility. The board praised her for keeping the doors open with limited resources. When did it become theft? Jonathan asked. Marcus looked at him. That is the question people ask when they want one clean moment to blame. There wasn't one. He explained that Evelyn created Harrow Community Strategies to receive consulting payments. At first, the company paid legitimate vendors. Later, invoices were inflated. Then services were invented. Older residents became useful because their names qualified Harrow House for transition grants, college funding, and employment programs. Even after they left, their files remained active. Why keep them from leaving? Annie asked. Because a resident who left stopped generating money. A young adult who stayed could appear in photographs, attend donor dinners, work in the building, and be counted under more than one program. What about the adoption letters? Marcus looked at her for a long moment. I handled finances, not placements. But you knew. I knew some inquiries were delayed. Delayed? His eyes dropped. Annie's voice sharpened. She told me no one wanted me. I didn't know what she told you. You knew enough to make copies. Marcus rubbed both hands over his face. Yes. The admission sat between them. Jonathan let the silence remain. Marcus looked at Annie. I told myself the center was still better than what many children had before. I told myself exposing Evelyn might close it. I told myself I needed more proof. You were afraid of what telling the truth would cost you, Annie said. I understand that, But I'm the one who paid for your silence. Marcus flinched. I know, he said. For the first time, he sounded less defensive than ashamed. He told them Evelyn had accused him of misappropriating funds after he questioned several transfers. Walter searched his office and threatened to report him unless he resigned. Marcus signed a non-disclosure agreement and left. Before I went, I copied everything, he said. The original hard drive? Claire had asked through a secure video connection. Marcus shook his head. A duplicate. Bank statements, internal emails, real resident counts, vendor records, donor reports before they were altered. Where is it? David asked. In a safe deposit box. Which bank? I'm not telling you. Until I have a cooperation agreement. David nodded. Reasonable. Annie did not share his patience. People are being threatened now. Sui. You had years. Marcus looked at her. And I wasted them. Jonathan leaned forward. Then don't waste another day. Marcus stared through the window at the marina. A fishing boat moved slowly toward open water. Finally, he reached into his shirt pocket and placed a brass key on the table. The box is at Gulf State Bank on Dauphin Street. My wife is listed as co-owner. The access card is in my truck. David picked up the key. Marcus kept one hand over it. There's something you need to understand. The records prove the money. They prove false names, false invoices, and accounts Evelyn controlled. But not the letters, Annie said. Not why she hid them. Can you prove she did? Not from the drive. Annie's disappointment showed. Marcus continued. But every year, Evelyn kept a private placement log in her office. Not the official one. Her own notes. Families. Dates. Reasons she blocked contact. Does it still exist? I saw it 6 months before I left. Jonathan asked, why keep something that incriminating? Because Evelyn never thought of it as incriminating. She thought it proved she knew better than everyone else. A dark sedan pulled into the parking lot. Marcus went still. The driver remained inside. Is that one of Walter's cars? Annie asked. Marcus stood so quickly the table shook. I don't know. His phone rang. He looked at the screen and turned pale. The caller ID read Harrow House. Marcus silenced it. A second later, Annie's phone vibrated inside her jacket. She took it out. The message contained a photograph of the restaurant entrance. Beneath it were 6 words. You should have let him stay gone. Marcus stared at Annie's phone, then toward the dark sedan in the parking lot. Back door, he said. Jonathan did not move. Do you know who's in that car? No, and I'm not waiting to find out. David slid the brass key into his pocket and stood. We leave separately. Marcus, you go with me. Annie stays with Jonathan. No, Annie said. They're following me. If I go with him, I lead them straight to him. Marcus gave a strained laugh. They already know where I am. The restaurant manager appeared from behind the counter, drawn by the tension at their table. Jonathan asked whether there was a service exit. The manager pointed toward the kitchen and said it opened behind the building near the dumpsters. Jonathan left cash on the table and guided Annie through the kitchen, while David and Marcus waited 30 seconds before following. The staff watched them pass but asked no questions. Outside, the air smelled of hot pavement and salt water. Jonathan's sedan stood near the side lot. Before they reached it, the dark sedan's headlights came on. Move, David said. They split as planned. Jonathan opened the passenger door for Annie, then crossed to the driver's side. David and Marcus hurried toward a rental car, parked 2 rows over. The dark sedan did not follow either vehicle immediately. That worried Jonathan more. They want us uncertain, Annie said as he pulled away. Jonathan glanced at her. You've seen this before. Miss Harrow never punished people in front of everyone. She waited until they didn't know what she knew. They drove without speaking for several miles, checking mirrors and changing routes twice before returning to the interstate. David called from a secure phone 20 minutes later. No visible tail, he said. Marcus is with me. We're heading to the bank with local counsel. Do not open the box without documenting everything, Jonathan replied. Marcus's voice came through faintly. I know how records work. You also waited years to use them, Annie said. The line went quiet. Jonathan looked at her, but she did not apologize. By late afternoon, David confirmed that the safe deposit box contained a hard drive, printed ledgers, copies of bank statements, and several folders of internal emails. The bank allowed the materials to be photographed and transferred under attorney supervision. Marcus signed an initial declaration identifying the documents and explaining how he created the copies. The evidence was enough to support a full forensic review. It was not enough to explain every hidden letter. On the drive back to Atlanta, Jonathan's phone rang repeatedly. 3 calls came from members of the foundation board. 2 came from his chief financial officer. 1 came from a major donor asking whether Harrow House was under investigation. He answered none of them until Annie asked, "Are you going to keep ignoring everyone for another hour? They're your people. They're people I work with. That doesn't make every call urgent. They could remove you." "They could." Annie turned toward the window. "You say that like it wouldn't matter." "It would matter. It just wouldn't change what is on that drive." They stopped at a gas station outside Montgomery. Annie bought bottled water with some of the money Jonathan had insisted she keep. When she returned, he was standing beside the car reading an email on his phone. His face had changed. "What happened?" she asked. "The Foundation's legal committee drafted a confidential resolution proposal." "What kind of resolution?" Jonathan locked the screen. "A possible agreement with Harrow House. Leadership review, repayment of disputed funds, independent oversight. No public allegations until the audit is complete." Annie stared at him. "No public allegations. It is one option. I did not approve it, but they wrote it because someone thought you might. Lawyers prepare options. That's what people say when they want to hide which option they prefer." Jonathan opened the passenger door. "We should discuss this after we return." "No, we should discuss it now." Cars moved in and out of the station behind them. A family loaded snacks into a minivan. An older man cleaned his windshield at the next pump. Annie lowered her voice. "Would the agreement include what she did to the letters?" "I haven't read the full draft." "Would Evelyn remain in charge?" "I don't know." "Would anyone tell the people whose names were used?" "I said I haven't read it." Her expression closed. Jonathan recognized the same look she had worn outside the cafe, when every answer sounded like another door being placed between her and the truth. He put the phone away. "I allowed the committee to examine a confidential path because Harrow House still has residents who need meals, school transportation, and a place to sleep." "That's what she says too." "I know." "No, you don't." Annie's voice shook, though not from fear this time. "She always said she kept things quiet for us. She hid the letters so we wouldn't be disappointed. She delayed people leaving so we wouldn't fail. She moved money so the doors could stay open. Every lie came with someone else's safety attached to it." Jonathan did not defend himself. She continued, "You told me justice wasn't supposed to wait until powerful people felt comfortable. I told you caution should protect the truth, not bury it. And now your lawyers are writing a burial plan." The words landed harder than she intended, but Jonathan accepted them. "You are right to question it," he said. Annie looked at him. "That isn't the same as saying you won't do it." "No." "Then say it." Jonathan hesitated. That hesitation answered her. Annie stepped away from the car. "Where are you going?" "To call Sarah. Your phone may still be monitored. Then I'll use the payphone inside." "There may not be one." "I'll borrow somebody's." Jonathan moved around the car but stopped several feet from her. "Annie, listen to me. A public accusation before the evidence is secured could give Evelyn time to claim political pressure, destroy records, or argue that we contaminated the investigation. She's already destroying records. We don't know that. The photograph, the break-in, the messages. Marcus being threatened. How much do you need before you stop calling everything uncertain?" Jonathan's voice remained low. "Enough to make sure she cannot walk away from it." Annie's eyes filled, but she did not look away. "You don't want the truth," she said. "You want a cleaner version of it." She entered the gas station before he could answer. That evening, they returned to the Foundation's offices through a private garage. Claire and David had already secured the hard drive in a locked evidence room. Sarah was preparing requests to colleges, banks, and former residents. The investigation was moving faster than before. Still, Annie kept her distance from Jonathan. While he spoke with David in the conference room, she crossed the hallway to find a charger for her phone. On a side table, beneath a stack of audit reports, she saw a document marked confidential. Proposed non-public resolution Harrow House. She should not have opened it. She did anyway. The draft proposed repayment, resignation of selected staff, new oversight, and a joint statement describing the matter as accounting failures caused by rapid growth. It made no mention of hidden adoption letters. It did not name Evelyn's personal accounts. It included language discouraging public accusations while negotiations continued. At the bottom was a blank line for Jonathan Reed's authorization. Annie heard footsteps behind her. Jonathan stopped in the doorway. "I told you I hadn't approved it. You let them write it. To understand every option." She held up the document. Every locked door in that house had a reason written on the other side. "Annie, you said you would not decide what happened next without asking me. I haven't decided. That's the problem." She placed the draft on the table and walked past him. "Where are you going?" "To finish this before everyone turns it into something respectable." Jonathan followed her into the hall. "Do not go back to Harrow House." Annie stopped but did not turn around. "The gala is tomorrow night," she said. "The private placement logs will be in Evelyn's office." Jonathan's voice hardened. "You are not going in there alone." Annie looked back at him. For the first time since the cafe, the fear in her face had been replaced by something more dangerous. Decision. Jonathan watched Annie walk toward the elevator. "Stop." She pressed the call button without turning. "You said you wouldn't force me. I'm not forcing you. I'm asking you not to mistake acting alone for being free." The elevator doors opened. Annie stepped inside, but Jonathan caught the door before it closed. "You found the records," he said. "You brought them out. You found Marcus. You have done more than anyone had the right to expect. Going back there by yourself does not prove anything. It proves I'm not waiting for your lawyers to decide which truth is affordable. That document was never approved. But you considered it." "Yes." The admission made her look at him. Jonathan released the elevator door and stepped inside. "I considered whether an orderly transition could protect the residents while we secured the evidence. I considered whether public exposure might cause donors to pull every dollar before independent support was in place. I considered the possibility that I was trying to protect my reputation without admitting it." "And what did you decide?" "That I don't know yet." Annie laughed once, without humor. "That must be nice." "What must be nice?" "Having enough power to wait until you feel certain." The elevator descended. Jonathan could not argue with her. Uncertainty had never cost him a bed, a meal, or the right to see letters written in his own name. When he delayed, professionals called it caution. When Annie hesitated, institutions called her unstable. The doors opened into the parking garage. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Somewhere you can't stop me." "That is not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Annie walked past the Foundation sedan toward the pedestrian exit. Jonathan did not follow immediately. He called Reverend Carter, then Rebecca Whitfield. Rebecca answered first. "Is Annie safe?" "For the moment." "What happened?" "She found a legal proposal she believes proves I intend to bury the investigation." "Do you?" "No." That was a slow answer, Mr. Reed. Jonathan looked across the garage at Annie's retreating figure. "She intends to return to Harrow House during the gala." Rebecca was silent for a moment. "Then don't send men after her. What would you suggest?" "Give her somewhere she can choose to go." Annie reached the exit before Rebecca's call came through to her phone. She stopped beneath a security light and answered. Jonathan remained far enough away not to hear the words, but he saw Annie's shoulders drop. 20 minutes later, Rebecca arrived in an older blue Buick. She did not rush toward Annie or demand an explanation. She opened the trunk, moved aside a box of library donations, and took out the folded blue quilt. "You can come home with me," she said, "or I can take you somewhere else. Your choice." Annie looked toward Jonathan. "Did he call you?" "Yes." "So he still decided for me." "He told me where you were. He did not tell me what to make you do." "That sounds like something he would say." Rebecca opened the passenger door. "Then be angry in the car. It has air conditioning." Annie almost smiled, but did not. Before getting inside, she walked back toward Jonathan. "I'm still going tomorrow." "I know. Don't try to lock me in another safe apartment." "I won't." "Don't call Walter or Evelyn." "I won't." "And don't use the police unless I ask." Jonathan's expression tightened. "I cannot promise that if you are in immediate danger." There, that's the part where you decide. That is the part where I refused to watch someone get hurt because I was afraid of losing her trust. Annie held his gaze. "Tomorrow," he continued, "the gala will have cameras, donors, staff, and private security. If you go inside, Walter may try to detain you or accuse you of trespassing. Evelyn may destroy the records before you reach them. She won't destroy the placement log. How do you know? Because she doesn't think it proves she did anything wrong. That matched what Marcus had said. Jonathan lowered his voice. At least let Sarah know what you intend. No. Why? Because she'll tell me to wait for verification. She will tell you not to risk yourself for evidence we may not need. We need those letters. We have the Whitfield's copies, not just mine. There are other names in Evelyn's office, other families, other people who still believe nobody came. Jonathan understood then. Annie was not returning only to strengthen a criminal case. She was returning for the record that had shaped lives beyond her own. I won't stop you, he said. But I will not pretend this is safe. I never asked you to. She turned and climbed into Rebecca's car. At the Whitfield house, Thomas had left the porch light on. He greeted Annie with a nod, then returned to the kitchen, where he was repairing the loose handle on a cabinet door. He did not ask what had happened. Rebecca served reheated chicken casserole and green beans. Annie ate little. After dinner, Thomas placed a key on the table. Guest room, he said. Front door stays unlocked until you decide you want it locked. Annie looked at the key. Why? Because a person can offer you a chair. Only you decide whether to sit in it. She carried the blue quilt into the room that had once been prepared for her. The walls were pale yellow now. Sewing boxes occupied one corner, and the bookshelf held mysteries instead of children's stories. Rebecca stood at the doorway. I'm going back to Harrow House tomorrow, Annie said. I suspected you might. You're not going to tell me not to? You've had enough people decide which doors you may enter. It could be dangerous. Yes. Annie waited for more. Rebecca added, courage doesn't become wisdom just because people admire it. Make a plan. For the next hour, Annie drew the Harrow House floor plan from memory. The donor gala would use the auditorium, dining hall, and front courtyard. Older residents would help with coats and table service. The younger children would remain in the residential wing under staff supervision, away from the event. Evelyn's office was behind the donor wall on the second floor. The private placement log was kept in a locked lower drawer. Walter carried the master key, but Evelyn kept another inside a porcelain box on her bookshelf. Annie still had the plain black slacks and white blouse older residents wore when serving at formal events. Evelyn had selected the uniform because donors preferred young people to look prepared for opportunity. Annie would enter through the kitchen loading area during the caterer's arrival. She would photograph the placement log, copy whatever records she could, and leave before Evelyn's speech ended. She did not plan to confront anyone. At midnight, Annie turned on her clean phone and found one message from Jonathan. I tore up the settlement draft. Full disclosure will go to the board tomorrow. That does not make me right. It only means you were right to challenge me. She read it twice, then set the phone aside without answering. Across Atlanta, Jonathan sat alone in his office with the torn pages in the trash beside him. His mother's old household ledger lay open on the desk. In the margins, she had once written the cost of bread, milk, bus fare, and school shoes, reducing her own meals when the numbers did not balance. For years, Jonathan had believed generosity began with having enough to give. Now he understood that giving without paying attention could leave someone hungry while the donor accepted applause. He called David. Prepare the full disclosure package. For the board? For everyone who needs it. That could cost you 2 directorships before breakfast. Then schedule the meeting early. The following evening. Black cars lined the circular drive outside Harrow House. Valets opened doors beneath white lights, while donors stepped onto the carpet carrying auction invitations. A banner stretched above the entrance. Every child deserves to be chosen. Annie stood in the service alley wearing black slacks, a white blouse, and the old canvas backpack. The silver USB rested inside her pocket. When the catering truck opened its rear doors, she lowered her head, lifted a tray of folded linens, and walked back into the place that had spent years teaching her she would never be chosen. The service entrance opened into a corridor behind the kitchen, where steam, clattering dishes, and overlapping instructions covered the sound of Annie's footsteps. Caterers moved between stainless steel counters carrying trays of crab cakes, stuffed mushrooms, and glasses arranged in rows. No one looked closely at the young woman holding folded linens. Harrow House had trained older residents to become part of the background at donor events. Annie placed the tray beside a service cart and moved toward the stairwell. The building had changed little. The same framed photographs lined the walls. Children smiled beside holiday trees. graduation banners, and ceremonial checks. Annie recognized several faces belonging to people who had left years ago. According to the reports on the USB, some of them still lived here on paper. Music drifted from the auditorium below. A string quartet played while donors found their tables. Through an open door, Annie saw teenagers collecting coats and handing out programs. They were safe, supervised, and far from Evelyn's office. She reminded herself why she had returned. Not to destroy their home, to stop Evelyn from owning their futures. Annie reached the second floor and waited until a staff member disappeared into the elevator. Then she crossed the donor gallery, where framed photographs showed Evelyn shaking hands with politicians, business leaders, and foundation directors. Jonathan appeared in 3 of them. In the largest photograph, he stood beside Evelyn with a ceremonial check between them. Annie and 6 other residents had been arranged behind them, all wearing matching blue shirts. Annie remembered that day. Evelyn had told them to smile because gratitude opened doors. None of them had been allowed to ask where the money went. She continued toward the executive wing. Evelyn's office door was locked. Annie crouched beside the bookshelf in the small reception area and reached behind a row of nonprofit leadership awards. The porcelain box was still there, white with painted roses. It had once held Evelyn's mother's jewelry. Now it held spare keys. Annie lifted the lid, empty. Her stomach tightened. "You should not be up here." She turned. Miss Loretta stood at the end of the hall wearing a black dress and a white apron. She had volunteered in the Harrow House kitchen for nearly 15 years. Age had rounded her shoulders, but her eyes remained sharp. Annie straightened. "I can explain. I expect you can." Loretta approached slowly. "Question is whether you have time." Annie looked toward the stairwell. "Walter's been checking every door since the guests arrived," Loretta said. "Evelyn told staff you might try to come back. Are you going to call him?" Loretta studied her face. "Did you take those records they're whispering about?" "Yes." "Were they false?" "No. That isn't what I asked." Annie corrected herself. "The records were real. The reports sent to donors were false." Loretta glanced at the office door. "I wondered why Keisha never got that scholarship." "You knew?" "I knew the girl cried in my pantry for an hour. Evelyn said the committee chose somebody else. The money was reported as paid in Keisha's name." Loretta closed her eyes for a moment. "Lord help us. I need the private placement log." "What for?" "It has the names of families Evelyn kept away. Not only mine." Loretta looked toward the auditorium as applause rose from downstairs. "I never saw her hurt a child," she said. "She didn't have to hurt us." "I know that now." Loretta reached into her apron pocket and removed a ring of keys. Annie stared at her. "I've opened this office every Monday morning for 11 years, Loretta said. "She forgets the people who clean up after her know where everything is." She unlocked the door. "You have 5 minutes." Annie entered and closed it behind her. The office smelled of lavender polish and paper. Evelyn's desk faced the window, positioned so visitors sat beneath the portraits of donors whose money kept Harrow House open. File cabinets occupied the wall behind it. Annie went to the lower right drawer. Locked. Loretta's key opened it. Inside were folders marked by year. Beneath them lay a black leather notebook. Private placement review. Annie opened it. Each page listed a resident's name, interested families, dates, and Evelyn's handwritten decisions. Too emotionally dependent on institution. Family lacks understanding of racial needs. Resident useful in peer leadership role. Departure would reduce transitional program count. Annie found her own name. Thomas and Rebecca Whitfield appeared 4 times. Beside the final request, Evelyn had written, "Do not proceed." Annie photographs well. Donors respond to her story. And losing another older black female resident will weaken next year's diversity numbers. Annie's vision blurred. The words reduced years of her life to a fundraising category. She photographed every page with her clean phone, then connected the silver USB to Evelyn's desktop computer. The device began copying the placement files and donor correspondence. A progress bar appeared. 30%. From downstairs, Evelyn's voice rose through the sound system. "At Harrow House, we do more than provide shelter. We give young people the knowledge that they have been chosen." Applause followed. Annie kept copying. 48%. She opened a cabinet containing resident rosters. Current lists showed 32 residents. Grant reports claimed 51. She photographed both sets. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Annie froze. Loretta spoke outside. "Mr. Price, you're needed downstairs. One of the auction screens isn't working." Walter answered, "Maintenance can handle it. The donors are asking for you." His footsteps stopped outside the reception area. Annie watched the progress bar. 63%. Walter tried Evelyn's office door. Locked. "Miss Loretta, who is in there?" "No one." The handle moved again. Annie disconnected the USB before the transfer finished and slipped it into her pocket. She took the placement log and opened the door to the adjoining records room. Behind her, Walter's key entered the outer lock. Annie crossed the records room and ducked behind a row of cabinets as the office door opened. Walter stepped inside. "Annie?" She held her breath. He moved toward the desk and saw the open drawer. His shoes stopped inches from the records room entrance. Annie's phone vibrated. She pulled it out quickly. A message from Jonathan filled the screen. The board approved full disclosure. Sarah has Marcus's statement. Do not confront Evelyn alone. Walter heard the vibration. He entered the records room. Annie moved between the cabinets, keeping low. The rear door led to a service corridor, but Walter stood between her and it. "Annie," he said, his voice calm. "You've already caused enough trouble. Come out before this becomes worse." She looked toward the narrow gap beneath the last cabinet. Walter's shoes moved closer. Then the fire alarm sounded. A sharp bell filled the building. Walter turned toward the hall. Annie did not know who had triggered it, but she used the moment. She ran through the rear door and into the service corridor. Guests began leaving the auditorium below. Staff called for everyone to remain calm. Annie moved against the flow, heading toward the second stairwell. She reached the landing and nearly collided with Evelyn Harrow. Evelyn wore a pale blue suit, and the expression she used when cameras were near. Her gaze dropped to the black leather placement log in Annie's hands. For 1 second, the public smile disappeared. Then it returned. "I knew you would come back," Evelyn said. "Children always return to the place that kept them alive." Annie tightened her grip on the book. "I'm not a child anymore." Evelyn's smile stayed in place, but her eyes shifted toward the black leather log in Annie's hands. "You have no idea what that book means," she said. "I know exactly what it means." The fire alarm continued ringing through the building. Guests crowded the lower hallway while staff directed them toward the courtyard. No smoke appeared. Somewhere below, Walter called for security to check the alarm panel. Evelyn stepped closer. "Give it to me." Annie moved back 1 step. "You wrote these notes," she said. "You kept families away because residents helped your numbers." "That is not what happened." Annie opened the log to the page bearing her name. "You wrote that losing another older black female resident would weaken your diversity numbers." Evelyn's expression hardened. "You read one sentence without understanding the situation. Then explain it. This is neither the time nor the place. It was the right place when you wrote it." Evelyn glanced toward the stairs. The evacuation had left the second floor mostly empty, but it would not remain that way for long. She lowered her voice. "Come into my office. We can discuss this privately." Annie thought of the recorder Sarah had given her earlier that afternoon. It was clipped beneath her blouse, small enough to hide under the fabric. Before entering the building, Annie had connected it to her phone so each recording would upload automatically whenever a signal was available. She pressed one finger against the side button through the cloth. A soft vibration confirmed it had started. "All right," Annie said. Evelyn led her back through the executive corridor. Walter appeared at the far end, but Evelyn raised a hand. "I'll handle this." Walter looked at the placement log. She accessed the computer. "I said I'll handle it." He did not argue, though his eyes remained on Annie as Evelyn closed the office door. The alarm stopped. The sudden silence made the room feel smaller. Evelyn crossed to the desk and held out her hand. "The book." Annie did not move. "You entered a restricted office, accessed confidential files, and removed institutional property. Those are serious offenses. Are they more serious than stealing scholarship money?" Evelyn sat behind the desk. "You have always had a gift for repeating things before you understand them. Then help me understand." Annie remained near the door, positioning herself so Evelyn could not move between her and the exit without warning. Evelyn folded her hands. "Harrow House has operated for 27 years. Do you know how many times state funding arrived late?" How many donors restricted money for programs that photographed well, while refusing to pay for utilities, payroll, roof repairs, or groceries? So you moved the money. I kept the institution alive. You transferred it into accounts connected to your sister. Harrow Community Strategies paid vendors the board could not hire directly. Did it pay for Keisha Monroe's scholarship? Evelyn's jaw tightened. Not every approved program proceeds as planned. The report said the money reached her college. Reports are summaries. They were lies. They were documents written to satisfy people who had never spent one night inside a home like this. Annie looked at the framed photographs on the wall. Donors stood beside Evelyn, smiling over checks. Jonathan's face appeared in more than one frame. You made them believe the money helped us. It did help you. It helped you keep us here. Evelyn rose. Do you think life outside these walls is kind to young people with no family? Do you know how many former residents end up homeless, unemployed, or worse because someone rushed them out in the name of independence? That didn't give you the right to hide letters. I prevented unstable placements. You never asked me. You were a child. And when I was 17, you were still unprepared. For what? For people who wanted to feel generous for a year and then discover that raising a traumatized black teenager was harder than they imagined. The words struck hard because they carried enough truth to resemble concern. Annie forced herself not to look away. The Whitfields kept writing. They did not understand your needs. You told them I didn't want contact. I protected you from another rejection. They never rejected me. You did it for them. Evelyn came around the desk. You see cruelty because you do not understand responsibility. I sat beside you when you were sick. I made sure you had school clothes. I found tutors when you fell behind. I gave you birthdays. Annie remembered the photograph left in her backpack. We know what you owe us. I remember, she said. Then stop pretending I was your enemy. Those things can be true, and you can still have used me. Evelyn's expression changed. Not much. Enough. Used you? For grants, photographs, donor dinners, diversity numbers. Evelyn looked toward the door, then lowered her voice further. Older residents gave stability to this institution. Donors trusted familiar faces. Transition grants depended on continued enrollment. If everyone left at 18, Harrow House would lose the funding needed to support the next group. The recorder beneath Annie's blouse captured every word. So you delayed people leaving. I extended support. You kept names active after people moved out. Administrative records are not always updated immediately. For 4 years, Evelyn's patience broke. You think accounting rules feed children? You think perfect paperwork keeps the lights on? I did what was necessary. Annie held up the placement log. You blocked families because we were worth more here. I made decisions based on the institution's survival. There it is. Evelyn stopped. Annie felt her own heart beating against the hidden recorder. You didn't save us because no one wanted us, she said. You needed us to believe no one wanted us. Evelyn's face lost its public softness. You ungrateful little girl. The words hung between them. Annie had heard ungrateful before. It had once been enough to make her apologize. This time, she did not. Evelyn took a breath and changed tactics. I can still help you. With what? A real college scholarship. An apartment. A paid position in our transition office. You could become proof that this institution works. You want me to sign something? A statement clarifying that you misunderstood internal records. I didn't misunderstand the letters. You saw fragments. I saw my name. You saw what fear wanted you to see. Annie almost laughed. That line worked better when I was 9. The office door opened. Walter stepped inside. The guests are returning, he said. We need to resolve this. His eyes went to the placement log, then Annie's pocket. Give me the USB. Annie did not move. Walter crossed the room. Evelyn said, do not make this worse. For whom? Annie asked. Walter reached for her wrist. She pulled back, but he caught her sleeve and removed the silver USB from her pocket. He held it up. This is all of it? Annie looked directly at him. Yes. It was not. The files had already begun uploading from her phone, and the recorder continued sending Evelyn's words to Sarah. Walter placed the USB in his inside pocket. Evelyn pointed toward the private sitting room beside the office. Keep her there until the gala ends. Then counsel can speak with her. I'm not staying. You will, Walter said. He opened the sitting room door and moved aside. Annie did not struggle. Fighting him would give Evelyn exactly the image she wanted. She walked inside. Walter locked the door behind her. The room contained 2 upholstered chairs, a side table, and a framed slogan on the wall. Every child deserves a safe place to land. Annie stood beneath it and listened as Evelyn and Walter moved away. For a few seconds, fear returned with such force that she could barely breathe. Then her phone vibrated inside the lining of her backpack. One message appeared from Sarah. Recording received. Stay calm. You are not alone. Annie looked toward the narrow service vent near the floor. The metal cover was fastened with 4 screws. She removed the clip from her old Harrow House name badge and knelt beside it. The metal clip bent after the second screw. Annie stopped, straightened it against the edge of the table, and tried again. The vent cover was old enough that the paint had sealed around its corners. Each turn produced a faint scrape that sounded too loud in the locked room. Outside, applause rose from the auditorium. Evelyn had returned to the stage. Annie pressed her ear to the door. Walter's footsteps were gone. Voices moved through the corridor, but none stopped outside the sitting room. She went back to the vent. The first screw dropped into her palm. The second followed. By the time she loosened the third, her fingers were shaking again. Not from hunger now, from the knowledge that Walter believed he had taken the only USB, and Evelyn believed Annie was contained until lawyers arrived to make her fear sound reasonable. The phone inside her backpack vibrated. Sarah had sent another message. Jonathan, Marcus, counsel, and investigators are on their way. Do not confront anyone. Annie almost laughed. She was locked inside Evelyn's office suite. Avoiding confrontation no longer felt like an option. Across Atlanta, Jonathan sat in the rear seat of David's car while Sarah played the recording through the speakers. Marcus and Claire followed in a second vehicle with the copied hard drive, bank documents, and sworn statements secured in a metal case. Evelyn's voice filled the car. Older residents gave stability to this institution. Donors trusted familiar faces. Transition grants depended on continued enrollment. Jonathan closed his eyes. He had heard administrators use phrases like that in board meetings for years. Stability, continuity, restricted funding, measurable outcomes. Language polished until no one could see the person trapped beneath it. Sarah stopped the recording. That admission connects the placement decisions to the funding. Is it enough? Jonathan asked. Enough to confront her. Enough to justify preservation of the records. The financial case still needs investigators and bank subpoenas. David glanced at him from the front seat. The state team will meet us there. They cannot search the building tonight without proper authority unless they see evidence being destroyed. Then we prevent anyone from destroying it. You are still a donor, Jonathan, not law enforcement. I know what I am. Sarah looked at him. Do you? He met her eyes in the mirror. For too long, a man who believed writing checks meant he had done his part. No one answered. At Harrow House, Annie removed the final screw. The vent cover pulled away, revealing a narrow opening and a shallow service passage used for wiring. It was not large enough to crawl through upright, but she had been smaller than most girls her age for years. She pushed the backpack ahead of her and slid one shoulder into the opening. The metal edge caught her blouse. She stopped, freed the fabric, and continued. Dust coated her hands. The passage extended only several feet before opening into the records corridor. Annie reached forward, pushed the opposite grill, and felt it give. Then voices sounded outside. Walter. She uploaded something. Evelyn answered. How? The recorder may still be on her. Then get it. Annie pulled herself forward faster. The vent grill fell outward and struck the floor. Walter opened the sitting room door at the same moment. Annie's legs disappeared through the passage as he entered. Stop. She dropped into the records corridor, grabbed her backpack, and ran. Walter came through the executive office rather than following the vent. Annie heard him behind her as she reached the donor gallery. Guests had returned to the auditorium. The hallway stood empty except for framed photographs and the muffled sound of Evelyn's speech. Walter caught Annie near the largest photograph of Jonathan holding the ceremonial check. He seized the strap of her backpack. Annie twisted free, but the bag slipped from her shoulder and fell. The zipper opened. Her clean phone slid across the floor. Walter reached it first. Annie stepped on his wrist. He released the phone with a curse. She snatched it and backed away. You are making this worse, he said. For you. Walter stood slowly. You think Reed will protect you after he sees what this does to his foundation? He already saw. You don't know men like him. Annie looked at the photograph on the wall. Jonathan smiled beside Evelyn, both of them holding a check, while children stood behind them like proof of virtue. No, she said. But I'm beginning to know what he does when he's wrong. The main entrance opened downstairs. Voices carried through the lobby. Jonathan's voice was among them. Walter heard it too. He moved toward Annie, but she grabbed the framed photograph from the wall and held it between them. It was too large to use as a weapon, but it forced him to stop. "What are you doing?" he asked, taking down another false report. She turned and walked toward the auditorium stairs, carrying the photograph. Walter followed but did not touch her again. Too many guests waited below. Too many phones were out. He could no longer control what the room would see. In the lobby, Jonathan faced two Harrow House security employees while David spoke with the event manager. Sarah stood beside Marcus and Claire. Two investigators from the Georgia Department of Human Services waited near the entrance with an attorney from the State Charity Division. Walter came down the stairs behind Annie. "She broke into a restricted office," he said. "She stole confidential records and damaged the building." Jonathan looked past him. "Annie, are you hurt?" "No." "Did anyone touch you?" Walter took the USB and locked me in a room. Every nearby conversation stopped. Walter raised both hands. "She entered unlawfully. We secured her until counsel could arrive. She is an adult," David said. "You had no authority to confine her." Evelyn's amplified voice drifted from the auditorium. "And now, it is my privilege to introduce a man whose generosity has changed countless young lives. Mr. Jonathan Reed." Applause filled the building. Evelyn had not yet realized he was standing in the lobby. Jonathan looked at Annie. Dust marked her blouse, and one sleeve was torn near the shoulder. She held the old framed photograph against her chest. "Sarah received the recording," he said. Annie nodded. "She admitted why she kept us. The board approved full disclosure." "You approved it?" "I did. That doesn't erase the draft." "No." She searched his face, perhaps waiting for an excuse. He offered none. The event coordinator appeared at the auditorium doors. "Mr. Reed, Miss Harrow is waiting for you." Jonathan turned to David. "Are the residents protected if we suspend management tonight?" "The independent services agreement is signed. Food, staffing, transportation, housing, and medical care continue. Evelyn cannot claim accountability will close the doors." Jonathan looked toward the investigators. One of them said, "We can preserve records and begin interviews. Any criminal determination comes later. That is enough for tonight." Walter stepped into his path. "You cannot walk onto that stage and make accusations based on stolen files." Jonathan regarded him. "Move. You will destroy this institution." "No, the people who falsified its records did that." Walter did not move until one of the state investigators came beside him. Jonathan entered the auditorium. Evelyn stood at the lectern beneath the banner proclaiming that every child deserved to be chosen. Surprise crossed her face, but she recovered before the applause ended. Jonathan climbed the steps and accepted the microphone. Hundreds of donors waited for the speech they had heard in different forms for years: gratitude, progress, hope, and proof that their money had done good. Instead, Jonathan looked directly at the audience. "For 9 years, my name helped this institution earn your trust," he said. "Tonight, I learned that trust was not properly verified. That failure belongs partly to me." The room went still. Evelyn took one step toward him. "Jonathan, perhaps we should discuss." "No," he said. "We have discussed too much behind closed doors." At the back of the auditorium, the doors opened. Annie stood there holding the framed photograph of herself, Jonathan, Evelyn, and the ceremonial check. Every face in the room turned toward her. This time, she did not lower her eyes. Annie walked down the center aisle carrying the framed photograph against her chest. The room remained silent except for the faint hum of the sound system and the scrape of one chair as a donor turned to see her more clearly. Evelyn stepped away from the lectern. "This young woman is distressed," she said. "She has entered private offices, removed confidential material, and misunderstood records she was never authorized to view." Walter appeared at the auditorium doors behind Annie. "Please allow us to escort her somewhere quiet." Jonathan held up one hand. "She is 18 years old," he said. "She will decide whether she stays." Walter stopped. Annie reached the stage. Dust marked the knees of her black slacks. and one sleeve of her white blouse was torn where it had caught inside the service vent. Her hand shook when she placed the photograph against the lectern. The picture showed Jonathan and Evelyn holding a ceremonial check. Annie and 6 other residents stood behind them in matching shirts, smiling for people who had never asked how the money was spent. Jonathan offered her the microphone. Annie stared at it. For years, microphones at Harrow House had belonged to adults. Residents were invited to say thank you, describe their dreams, and explain how fortunate they were. Their stories were reviewed before donor dinners and shortened when they became uncomfortable. Evelyn lowered her voice. "You do not have to embarrass yourself." Annie looked at her. That was when the shaking slowed. She took the microphone. "For years, when adults asked how I was doing, I said I was fine." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Several people near the back leaned forward. "I said it when I was scared. I said it when I was hungry. I said it when I had questions I knew I wasn't supposed to ask." Fine was the answer that made adults comfortable. Evelyn turned toward Jonathan. "This is not responsible." He did not take the microphone from Annie. She opened the black placement log. "I grew up believing no family had ever wanted me. Miss Harrow told me that more than once. She said older black children were difficult to place, and that Harrow House was the only family that had chosen me." A murmur moved across the room. Annie removed copies of the letters from her backpack. "These were written by Thomas and Rebecca Whitfield. They asked to meet me when I was 9. They wrote again when I was 10, 11, and 12. Rebecca rose from a table near the aisle. Thomas stood beside her. Annie held up another page. "A retired teacher offered to become my guardian. Another family sent birthday cards. I never saw any of them." Evelyn reached toward the microphone. "Placement decisions are complex. Children are often protected from correspondence that could cause emotional harm." Annie moved the microphone out of her reach. "You told the families I didn't want contact. You were not ready. You never asked me. I was responsible for your welfare." Annie opened the log to the page bearing her name. "This is what you wrote after the Whitfields contacted you for the 4th time." She read slowly. "Do not proceed. Annie photographs well. Donors respond to her story. And losing another older black female resident will weaken next year's diversity numbers." The silence in the auditorium changed. It was no longer uncertainty. It was recognition. Evelyn's face tightened. "That sentence has been removed from its administrative context." "What context makes it acceptable?" Rebecca asked from the audience. Evelyn looked toward her. "You did not understand Annie's needs. We were never allowed to meet her." Several donors began checking the printed programs and annual reports at their tables. Annie looked at Evelyn. "You said you saved me because no one wanted me. I gave you a home. You didn't save me from being unwanted. You hid the people who wanted me." The words carried through the auditorium without effort. For a moment, Evelyn had no answer. Then she turned toward the audience. "Harrow House has served young people for 27 years. We have provided meals, education, health care, and stability when the state and private families failed them. Were difficult financial decisions made? Yes, but every decision was made to keep these doors open." Sarah stepped beside the sound technician at the rear of the room. A recording began to play through the speakers. Evelyn's own voice filled the auditorium. Older residents gave stability to this institution. Donors trusted familiar faces. Transition grants depended on continued enrollment. Evelyn turned pale. Sarah played the next section. If everyone left at 18, Harrow House would lose the funding needed to support the next group. Then Annie's recorded question, "So you delayed people leaving?" Evelyn's answer followed. "I extended support." The recording stopped. Marcus walked toward the stage carrying the metal evidence case. Claire and David came with him. 2 state investigators remained near the entrance. Marcus set the case on a table. "I was finance manager here for 6 years," he said. "I signed reports I knew were misleading. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself the institution did enough good to justify the numbers." Evelyn stared at him. "You stole confidential records after mismanaging accounts." Marcus nodded once. "That was the story you offered me if I stayed quiet." He opened the case. Inside were bank statements, vendor records, internal emails, and the copied hard drive. Claire addressed the room in plain terms. She explained that funds assigned to scholarships, medical services, and transition housing had passed through Harrow Community Strategies, a company linked to Evelyn's sister. Former residents' names remained active years after they left. Colleges listed as receiving scholarship money had confirmed they received nothing. Keisha stood from a side table. "My name was used for $8,000, she said. "I never got it." Darnell rose next. "The reports say they paid my rent. I slept on my cousin's couch." Evelyn gripped the edge of the lectern. "These examples do not show the whole picture. Restricted grants often fail to cover basic needs. I moved funds so this institution could survive." Annie answered her. "Keeping the doors open never gave you the right to lock our futures behind them." Applause did not follow. The moment was too serious for applause. Instead, donors began standing. Some moved toward Sarah. Others asked Claire for copies of the preliminary findings. One elderly woman removed her name badge from the donor table and placed it face down. Walter moved toward the metal case. A state investigator stepped into his path. "I need you to remain where you are, Mr. Price. I am responsible for security, not for this evidence." Walter stopped, but his eyes went to Annie. "You think this ends well for everyone living here?" he asked. "When donors pull out, what happens to them?" Jonathan took the microphone. "Essential services have already been transferred to an independent account. Food, housing, transportation, school support, and medical care will continue. Current residents will not pay for the choices adults made." Evelyn stared at him. "You planned this?" "No," Jonathan said. "I prepared for the consequences you kept using as an excuse." One of the investigators approached the stage and informed Evelyn that all financial and placement records were now subject to preservation. She was not under arrest that evening, but she could not remove, alter, or destroy any document. Evelyn looked around the room at the donors who had once greeted her with admiration. "You will regret humiliating this institution," she said. Annie closed the placement log. "The institution is not the person who ran it." Above the stage, one corner of the banner came loose. "Every child deserves to be chosen," folded inward until only the words "to be chosen" remained visible. Annie looked at the hidden letters in her hand, then at the people who had finally heard what those letters meant. "Choice begins with the truth," she said. The investigation began before the last donor left the building. State officials sealed Evelyn's office and the financial records room. Staff members were interviewed one at a time. Current residents remained in their rooms with familiar caregivers, while an independent youth services team took control of meals, medication schedules, transportation, and overnight supervision. No one was put out on the street. That mattered to Annie. For years, Evelyn had used the possibility of collapse as a shield. She had taught everyone that questioning her meant endangering the people who depended on Harrow House. By morning, the building was still open, breakfast was served on time, and the school van left at 7:30 as usual. Only Evelyn's office remained dark. The legal process moved more slowly than the exposure at the gala. Investigators examined bank accounts, grant applications, donor reports, placement records, and the private companies connected to Evelyn's family. Sarah's first article appeared 3 days later under Annie's name, supported by documents, former residents, college officials, and Marcus's sworn testimony. The headline did not call Annie troubled or ungrateful. It called her a witness. Within 2 months, Evelyn was charged with charitable fraud, false claims, embezzlement, falsification of records, and obstruction. Walter faced charges for unlawful surveillance, illegal entry, interference with a witness, and confining Annie against her will. Marcus was not allowed to walk away untouched. His cooperation reduced the consequences he faced, but he remained accountable for the reports he had signed. "I thought telling the truth at the end would erase staying quiet at the beginning," he told Annie outside the courthouse. "It doesn't," she said. "I know, but it still matters that you told it." He nodded, accepting both parts. Jonathan faced consequences of his own. The Reed Foundation released the internal reviews, showing how warning signs had been ignored. 2 boards asked him to resign. Major donors accused him of damaging public trust by admitting failure so openly. Jonathan did not defend himself by pointing to Annie. At a press conference, he said, "My signature helped false reports appear credible. I did not steal the money, but I lent my name to people I failed to question. Power does not become innocent simply because it remained uninformed." The Reed Foundation created an independent oversight council made up of former foster youth, social workers, nonprofit auditors, legal advocates, Black community leaders, and young adults preparing to leave residential care. Jonathan was given one seat, not the head of the table. He accepted it. Harrow House continued under temporary management. Every resident received access to personal records and an advocate who did not work for the institution. Scholarship accounts were reviewed individually. Families and mentors whose letters had been withheld were contacted where appropriate, but no relationship was forced. Annie insisted on that, finding the Whitfields had not repaired the years that had been taken from them. Rebecca and Thomas did not ask her to call them mom or dad. They did not introduce her as the daughter they had lost. They began with Sunday dinner. The first week, Annie stayed for 40 minutes. The next time, she helped Thomas replace a porch light. A month later, she and Rebecca visited the library where Annie's mother had once brought her to story hour. Their relationship grew through ordinary things: grocery lists, missed phone calls, burnt biscuits, college forms, and disagreements over whether Annie needed a warmer coat. Rebecca never said, "You belong to us," she said. "There is always a place at the table. You decide what that means." Annie enrolled in a college program combining social work with nonprofit administration. Her scholarship came from an independent fund created from recovered money, not from Jonathan personally. She wanted to understand both sides of the system, the people and the numbers. "Compassion without records can be manipulated," she told Sarah during a follow-up interview. "Records without compassion can hide people. You need both." 1 year after the gala, the building reopened under a new name, the Open Door Center. The old executive records room became a youth rights library. Locked cabinets were replaced with secure files residents could access through independent advocates. A public board near the entrance listed every grant received, every program expense, and contact information for outside oversight. The donor wall was gone. In its place hung a simple sign: "No decision about you without you." The silver USB rested inside a small glass case near the library entrance. Beside it was a statement Annie had written: "Evidence is only a beginning. Someone still has to decide that the truth is worth carrying." After the reopening ceremony, former residents, staff, community members, and supporters gathered in the dining room. Miss Loretta had supervised the food herself: roasted chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, cornbread, peach cobbler, sweet tea, and coffee strong enough to satisfy the older guests. Annie stood behind the serving table, filling plates for everyone else. She gave Thomas extra cornbread. She placed greens on Rebecca's plate before Rebecca could object. She handed Reverend Carter a slice of peach cobbler he claimed he did not need. Then Annie reached for another plate. Her hand paused. For years, she had served first and eaten later. Sometimes later never came. She placed roasted chicken on the plate, then macaroni and cheese, greens, and a piece of cornbread. A full serving. For herself. Jonathan noticed from across the room but said nothing. He had learned that not every meaningful moment needed to be named by the person who witnessed it. Later, Annie stood near the front entrance with the letters returned to her in a slim folder beneath her arm. Evening settled over Atlanta. Cars moved along the street, and laughter carried from the dining room behind her. Jonathan approached holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered her one. She accepted it. For a moment, they watched people come and go through the open doors. "Are you all right?" he asked. Annie looked down at her hands. They were steady. She thought of the cafe, the black Suburban, the USB cutting into her palm, and the sentence she had used whenever the truth felt too dangerous. "I don't have to be fine anymore, sir." Jonathan waited. Annie looked back at the table where the Whitfields sat beside former residents who had once believed they had been forgotten. Then she looked through the open door toward the street. "I finally get to choose what comes next." She stepped outside. This time she was not running from anyone. She was walking toward a life that belonged to her. This story reminds us that kindness without honesty can become another form of control. Real compassion does not demand gratitude, silence, or dependence. It gives people the freedom to choose their own future. It also shows that justice begins when someone is willing to question a trusted name, examine the truth, and stand beside the person whose voice has been ignored. Most importantly, being helped does not mean owing someone your life, and saying "I'm fine" should never be the price of feeling safe. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.